The impact of tourism generally tends to pass communities like this completely by. We're not involved in it. We might end up selling hot dogs or cleaning up and working in the cafes and all the other kind of activities that are generated by tourism. But there is a clear sort of circle drawn around the city that says that this part is for the tourists and that the rest of it isn't. And the bits that aren't are quite distinctly the communities like this, where people might see lives that people lead. You know, they might touch on the reality, and that's not the kind of image. They don't want to. They want to move away from tartan and shortbread, but they don't actually want people to see real people's lives. I mean, even they do it in the city as well. I mean, they cleared up a lot of the rough sleepers. When people were visiting the city, people were actually cleared off the streets, literally, by the police. You know, not in an aggressive way, but they were certainly told to sort of not be there. You know, and it's that kind of thing. It's that desire to present an image to people and not really address the reality of what the city is like that you live in. That I think is quite worrying, because not only does it doesn't fairly represent what's happening in Edinburgh, but it also it means that communities like this don't access any of the rewards that come from tourism. These things are geared towards people who come into the city and bring, and the council are quite open about it. You know, they will say, oh yes, if we do this and that and the other, it will attract so and so millions of pounds, you know, 40 million, whatever, because people are coming into the city to spend. But, you know, they're not, we see no reward for that. We see no benefit from that. And nor does it reflect itself in income to the council, which is then spent in the communities that need the money. The income to the council is used elsewhere. We have not seen any benefits from that supposed increase in tourism. The problem is that people tend to live in these communities, and the difficulty is that because of the kind of discrimination that goes on, we tend to stay within these communities, and it becomes much harder for people to move out of these communities. So what you will find is in a community like this, you will have people who will have been born here, whose parents will have been born here, whose grandparents will have been born here, and you get problems possibly within families, problems of unemployment that will carry on because that has happened. That perhaps the grandfather lost a job in the 70s in the docks or on the railways or whatever, and the father has also never known work because of the recession. So the children never know that kind of environment. They don't live in that environment where work is seen as being something that is a normal way to go on, and it becomes very hard, much harder than it is in other communities, to break down that kind of cycle.
When we came out here, the high-rise flats were built to accommodate the overflow from Leith to the suburbs of the town. They were the most sought-after high-rise flats in the area at that time. They were modern, they had the central heating, they had everything in them, and you could not, 10-year waiting list it was before you could get a house in high-rise flats. We had baths. Didn't have these sort of things in Leith, and they had to go to the local swimming pool to get a bath. The dockers, the fish workers, the steel workers,
they live here,
everything was happening in Leith at that time.
Because there is nowhere else that would give you a flat. The housing association, you've got a waiting list as long as you're on. So basically, the councillor are the only people you can go to.
You can wait years for a council house.
Yeah.
I've known people that have been waiting, that were still with living with family.
Because
and
they
have been
can't get a
waiting
house.
9-10 years to get a flat or a house. So where do you go from there? And we've got straight through flats as well.
Asbestos warnings.
Up there.
What's that about?
It's according to the surveys that we've had back from the council, is that there are asbestos in the landings. We don't know how long it's been there, or
Well, it's probably been there from the beginning, right enough. Cause
according to the people, there's only the landings got it. The houses don't have it. You know, the actual houses and the walls, they don't have it at all. It's just these landings that have the asbestos.
But they found traces of asbestos in
In
the
the
houses.
houses.
On the floors we've got
The
tiles.
tiles.
It's a concrete base, but then there's tiles put on it. And when they were raking them up, that's when they found them.
It's not a lot. It's not a high percentage of asbestos in the houses. But what they are telling you is if you do want them lifted, they have to phone the council and they will send out the appropriate people to deal with it.
And it's double bagged and then taken away straight
Yeah,
away.
straight
And dumped in a public dump.
Yeah, and that's all they do with it.
What other kind of problems do you have here? I mean, generally in the flats.
Dampness is I would say 90% of our problems.
It's not damp actually, it's condensation.
Well, they say condensation, but it's black fungus. It's usually around the windows and at the
balcony
doors where they get black. The windows aren't very good, so you're getting the sort of the water penetration coming through, which makes it even worse.
Very, very cold places.
Very cold.
Drafts are
There's
unbelievable
nothing. I
around
mean,
here.
the windows that are in have been in, what, about 15, 20 years?
Well, I've been in here 10 years and they were in here about, I think it was
About
5 years, about 15,
About 15 years they've been in altogether.
And that's them telling us now
Now
that
that
they're
they're
not
no
safe.
good, they're not safe, they're unsafe.
And as you can see, we have cracks,
All over the floor.
floors up the side and going up there. But they're only cosmetic, just to let you know.
Some of the houses are worse than others. We have a lot of houses that water actually runs down the walls.
And they tell
Whether
you
it be the living room or
a bedroom.
a bedroom, but they're telling you to keep your heating on,
And to open your windows.
open your windows. People in flats like this have not got that kind of money. The majority of us, or of the people, are on income support or whatever. They can't afford to heat their houses. It's very expensive to heat one of these places. One room. If you can heat one room, you're not so bad.
And it's usually your living
Your
room.
living room. And your bedrooms are very cold.
The council supply you with a nice electric fire.
But they also have heating in. You know, the big heaters.
Storage heat.
Storage heaters, and they run a white meter, they run during the night. You set the timer for that and you have that during the night.
Yeah.
But they are very
But they're
expensive.
very expensive, and a lot of people can't afford to use them.
I've actually just switched mine off because it was eating me electricity like there was no tomorrow. Because I've had mine on over the winter. And I've only had the one on, and that's the one in the living room, because basically to try and keep the place warm. Because you can't even put the kids one on, because that just runs away with the electricity, and that's just a small one you get. And
But they're very cold houses.
very.
Very.
You can actually watch the curtains swaying with the window, with the drafts coming
Your
through.
ceilings can be damp. It's like you can take your hand across the top of the ceilings, and it's just like water.
It's the water surf.
It's just condensation in the water.
What about investment? I mean, when was the last time there was any investment in these buildings?
Couldn't tell you.
When was the last time we got anything done here?
The last time we got anything done was actually
The
the painting down the stair in the foyer.
In the front foyer where we came in.
That was
Last year. We
this
had
time
that
last
painted. We had new lino put down last year, which has been an utter waste of money because it had to be
cut
and redone again because there was bubbles coming up in it. We had a cladding, if you could call it cladding, done one Sunday morning, and it blew off.
Well, they don't actually. What they do is they actually paint this rubber stuff on it, and that's it cladded. It's a green. Well, if you have a look when you go outside, it's green, and they just paint it,
But
and
it
that's
blew
all.
off.
And it blew off.
It blew off. And up till then, there's not been any
Anything else?
major work done here at all. None.
And as I say, I've been here 10 years. It's 11 years now.
10 years permanently.
I'll be 11 years in March. I've been in the flats.
And there's never been any big repairs done or anything. Nothing at all.
Waterfront Edinburgh is a joint venture between the City of Edinburgh Council and Scottish Enterprise Edinburgh and Lothian, and it's been formed by those partners in order to oversee the regeneration of this large area of land along the Granton waterfront. It's, depending on where you draw the boundaries, it's somewhere between 350 and 450 acres. Some of that is water, and it's long been recognised that it's an area that needs attention, and we're here to do it. We've got an area of land which the City Council has acquired in advance of our formation, which has been transferred into our books, which we own, and the balance of the cash which is coming into the company comes from Scottish Enterprise Edinburgh and Lothian, and a bit more from the City of Edinburgh, about 36 million in all. We envisage this area as what you might call an out-of-centre central business district, kind of thing that happens quite commonly in continental Europe and in Asia and in America, less common in the UK, but Edinburgh is a classic for it because the City of Edinburgh is so crowded already, and with two World Heritage Centres in the middle, it's clearly not possible to do some of the things that a city like ours needs in the long term. Now, you know and I know that Edinburgh is famous as a centre for financial services. It's also obvious that the financial service industry is expanding in lots of ways. There's the obvious big boys like Standard Life and the Royal Bank, who have their huge office complexes, and now and again they have a big upheaval and want to expand substantially. The Bank of Scotland is a case in point that may well do that. Now it's merged with Halifax. But there's also a whole host of other operations, loosely under the heading of financial services, support businesses to all this. And these big businesses bring with them increasing demand for these smaller businesses. So that's one highly likely approach. We also have a license for a World Trade Centre, and I think it's generally acknowledged that Edinburgh's offer to the outside world is strong in financial services, as I've been saying, but possibly weak in other aspects of world trade. And it is the capital city of Scotland. We do have a big hinterland in the Lothians of manufacturing, and there is a need to up the city's profile in this area as well. So we're going to make that opportunity available. But in the end, it's a question of who'll take the risk, business cycle, get the timing right, make sure the infrastructure is of the first quality. We can be reasonably sure that in 5 years' time, which is quite a short space of time, the main imprint of infrastructure, roads, services, sewers, all those kinds of things will be on the site. You'll be able to see what's there, and we'll have delineated the sites that there are for development. After that, it's tremendously dependent on the way the market operates, and that in turn is dependent on the business cycle. Now we're all, I think most people in Edinburgh are pretty bullish about this. I mean, provided Edinburgh can provide the facilities, then we have a wonderful location and an awful lot going for us, and so we're probably going to do quite well. But I wouldn't like to put a time scale on when we'll be finished as such. That may well be 15-20 years.
think there's a real problem in terms of what Edinburgh's trying to achieve, in the sense of the contradictions between being a wealth-producing city and actually ensuring that the inhabitants of the city at the lowest end are not made more vulnerable and are not actually damaged in the process. And it's going to be a major problem for the city over the next 10 years. I don't know how much the Lord Provost Commission, the One City strategy, is actually going to address those kind of things, but I think it really is going to cause a lot of problems, because developers have got one agenda, communities have got another agenda, and it's like you're so far apart at times that you're not even talking the same language, using the same kind of language in terms of both speaking English, but you're not using the same language in terms of what you're trying to do with it.
Do you feel the project
and
is
it's
consensus?
you sometimes think, well, are we ever going to get there?
Oh,
Are
yes.
we ever going to get them to
Oh
listen
yes,
to what
it
we're
does.
saying?
It's one of the things that Edinburgh has done, the City of Edinburgh Council and Scottish Enterprise has done amazingly well. Before the joint venture was ever established and before the master plan was printed as draft, there was an enormous programme of consultation with the community, and the master plan largely reflects the results of that consultation. It happens to be a rather good master plan. It's something with which we're all content to work. We don't find ourselves fighting it or saying it's all wrong, which makes it easier for us to go back to the community, as we regularly do, report what's going on, keep them on side, etc., etc. And so I think there is a very, very high degree of consensus about what should happen here. Of course, Edinburgh, like many other places, is also beset by doubters who say, oh, we've had all this before, when is something going to happen, all that sort of thing. But I think people will very shortly see that actually this is the exception that proves the rule, if that's fair, which it probably isn't. And we will be immensely successful. I think it's going to be something of which we're all very proud.
Certainly the City Council, one would imagine that they'll give companies some kind of leeway with rates or with business taxes for a 5 or 10 year period. That's normally standard. And then there's probably, whether it's Scottish Enterprise or the government, that would put a lump of money in at the start, which allows you to pay for the park, the lake and the park and the landscaping, and probably get a bit more finish on the buildings than you'd expect in a lot of other business parks. But it does look just like that, It's maybe 10% extra budget that they can put on some fins on the windows, or have some kind of posh solar lighting system. But again, there's countless examples of business parks, even 10, 20 years old now, which they're going out of fashion and out of date, and the companies move on, and it is a very transient form of development. It will last as long as the tax breaks normally last, and then you'll move on. And Motorola, Livingston's an example of that, where eventually there's a better deal somewhere else, and the decision's been made somewhere on the other side of the globe. So, the sustainability of that development for the local community is not an issue that they would have to consider.
You wonder for whom all this effort has been made. It's kind of like the landscape here in the middle, and then you don't have any of those people here. There's no one here.
Well, there was a master plan done, I think, which is probably set some rules about the height and the actual volume of the buildings. And we were talking before about that. There's probably reams and reams of research about this kind of optimum size for a medium to large size business that wants to settle in Scotland. So they've probably worked out quite carefully how much floor space is the right amount to use. But then, as far as I know, most of the buildings were built speculatively without a client, so they've gone for that sort of corporate anonymous greyness, which in a lot of ways allows them to not have any kind of identity. And you wouldn't know, I mean, you wouldn't be able to tell from looking at one building to the next whether it was a bank, an insurance company, or an arms manufacturer. You know, there's no sort of way in which you can differentiate the actual style of the architecture from the potential client. It was curious because a lot of the buildings have won praise in the sort of architectural press for being sustainable or incorporating energy-saving techniques. But yeah, I think you have to question whether they'll be here in their present form in even 30 years or 40 years. I mean, they don't appear to have much of a lifespan.
Yeah.
Which brings into question the whole idea that it's a sustainable urban development. I mean, the parkland gives that impression as well, that somehow it's at harmony with nature and with the surrounding environment. But a lot of the buildings are starting to suffer already after just a few years. So I think it would be interesting if you could sort of go into the future and see in 50 years' time, not just in terms of the buildings, but the companies as well. I mean, it's all financial sector companies, and it's very questionable whether that will exist in 50 years, and then what do you do with them? And they're probably unsuitable for most other types of work. I mean, it's very much late 20th century office space that they've created.
Okay. Oh, we've got new graffiti.
That's old stuff. 2902, 29102.
Yeah. What's open? I don't know how to put locks on the thing anyway, did we? I don't know how to put locks on it. Is there anything coming up about the windows? Is there any more feedback on the windows? The survey? No.
Cleaning.
Cleaning.
Give them a phone. Because I know they've done one of the blocks.
That's definitely not this one.
I'll give them a phone and find out if I can get her off date.
Right. So obviously they've not been in this one, but I've never seen a window cleaner yet.
No,
So have you?
They were here in January because concierge had to sign slips for them cleaning.
Which
And
block
what
did
did
they
they
do?
do?
Three of them.
That's never.
That's,
Blocks.
I mean,
Some of the windows they couldn't get open, but the 3 blocks are done in January and they've all been signed for.
No, either we're going about half blind shut or whatever. Because that's never been washed.
I know there was some of the windows, you couldn't get open because or whatever, or concierge office, or workers before they get keys, and I've got no spares.
But did Irene not say she had a spare one?
not to my knowledge, I'm not saying that.
I'm sure she had one because I'm sure we tried to open our own window across the street. Because I think if I remember right, it says to you, you should get a coffee.
Pardon me?
Just don't want to do that.
The natural instinct of house owners is to shut themselves away, and if they've paid a lot of money, to try to make sure they are differentiated from those who haven't paid a lot of money. And equally, bottom end of the scale, you are diffident and shy about rubbing shoulders with the knobs if you feel they're in a different bracket altogether. Now that's a divisive and not very satisfactory situation which has blighted an awful lot of British society. We want to try to do something to make that less likely. And we're helped by an ancient Scottish tradition of sharing the same stair. You know, the aristocrat and the prostitute, the old story in the old town, this is how it used to be. I'm not saying we'll get the latter down here, but you know what I mean. We want to feel that we're all part of the same human race. Another very ambitious objective is to try to combine the best of modern architecture, and I mean the best, with all the materials, consideration about materials that goes with it. So we're not cheapskate, we're not cutting corners, we're not just being ingenious with cheap materials, we are building good things with good materials. But to combine that with our roots, there's a great feeling that much modern architecture says goodbye to tradition and to roots and to history. And you can see this in many current examples throughout the UK and Europe. They may be wonderful buildings, but where are you? You've no idea. And I think one of our targets is to make sure that this is rooted in Edinburgh, that it's part of the east of Scotland, and above all that it is Scotland, that you know you're in Scotland. You are not in Vienna or Malmö or Paris. You know, that there is something that is uniquely characteristic, which at its best Scottish architecture has always shown. At its worst, we've been about as bad as anyone in Europe. You know, in the 20 years since the war, some of the worst stuff you've ever seen, as we all know, has been constructed. We just want to avoid that mistake, and if possible, roll back the frontiers a bit and do something which people will come and admire.
Says Loch Ross in memory of Bill Ross, Chief Executive of Edinburgh Development and Investment Limited and Director of New Edinburgh Limited. The driving force behind Edinburgh Park opened 29th July 1996. Nice touch.
I guess if you're paying for it, you can afford to name the loch after yourself as well. And this is the kind of one of the key points in the whole development, because the point where they can place that big camera in the corner there,
Yeah.
and they get both a view right along this axis and then the full length of the actual business park itself. So with one strategically placed camera and a bit of clever planning, they've got almost complete control of this space. I suspect the moment you go beyond the range of this, there'll be a whole network of small cameras that each building will have, and they can sort of control the back spaces and the smoking areas and so forth.
Yeah.
But it's a classic. This is the classic moat and the watchtower,
Yeah.
model that they've got.
It's also the little bending in the axis here, which is important because that means you have even more view come like to the very end of the axis, which is important. As an old 17th century fortification trick where you have kind of like the viewpoint and then you just bend inwards, bend outwards again, and therefore you have a much better view along the wall you want to kind of like protect.
Do you think this typifies changes in surveillance technology in general? I mean, the space is quite open in a sense.
Well, it is open, but although it's open, you can, or maybe because it's open, you can see very well. And the whole point about surveillance is that you can see. And as soon as you can see something, you can more or less catch it.
I mean, if you were to look at somewhere like the Old Town in Edinburgh with the wynds and the lanes and the crooked streets, it's that kind of nightmare for somebody who's wanting to survey that area and control that area, because there's all sorts of possibilities for deviant or abnormal behaviour to go on in those spaces which can't be controlled. So in a lot of ways, the openness, which I think, if you like the untrained eye, you would think, well, it's a sort of free and liberated space. It's in fact done for the opposite reasons, which is, Florian says, that you can keep a close eye on everything here, and there's nowhere that you can go and do anything which, legal or illegal, which wouldn't be approved by the management company here. But there's also, I think there's a change. I think there's a sophistication that's come about since CCTV, when it sort of first appeared, was very in your face, and you were aware of it, and you felt it sort of looking at you all the time. But now, that camera there is disguised as a street lamp, and it looks as if it's part of the kind of the grand urban design rather than something which is added on at the end to control the space. So there's a sophistication in terms of it's now just part and parcel of the actual sort of landscape. Whether it makes people feel more secure or more comfortable, I think it's questionable here.
Well, half the time I was wandered into the toilets of a university and just washed there. The other half of the time I just took showers over at the train station. Rail Trail offers some sort of shower facility where you just pay money and have a shower. And the price went up fairly rapidly between all the times I was homeless. But I did smell pretty bad. As I say, I couldn't always afford to go into like this, the station and pay money to have a shower, or like pay to do my laundry or anything. And my clothes got old and ratty, and they smelled bad and whatever. So yeah, it was a difficulty and something I didn't actually bother that much with, which obviously didn't help me get a job or anything. Well, it's probably not totally inevitable. You could actually spend a lot of time and effort actually like keeping yourself clean and presentable, but you know, at the end of the day, I mean, chances are it's for 90% of the time that's going to be a wasted effort anyway. You are still going to be sleeping on the streets, you know, tomorrow night just as you are tonight. So that's pretty much why I didn't bother. Quite as much as, you know, more than I did. What you get is a sort of, well, what you get is basically gentrification. Everybody chases after the same few people. You know, that happens to be the ones with money, which happen to be the ones with these jobs in these office blocks or whatever. So, you know, the locals and the natives, and you know, all the people who lived here before, you know, they're no doubt going to get priced out soon. There's a whole sort of cultural, I don't know. There's a sort of cultural takeover but happening. You know, you get like sort of pubs full of Edinburgh locals being knocked down and turned into tapas bars or whatever. Which, you know, I don't necessarily like. There was one instance. Well, there was instances of people just trying to tell me to go away. I got threatened vaguely behind my back by a couple of nightclub bouncers who. And then, like, the next day, I got a visit from like some doctor who basically told me that these guys were going to beat the shit out of me, and that's when I left that particular area. I've had the police called on me once. That was somebody must have thought I was a drunk sleeping in the stairs, but I thought they couldn't see me, but they obviously could. And so the police came along, kicked me up the arse, and told me to leave elsewhere. I think they thought I was drunk too. But oh yeah, and I do remember once some nice student girl actually. I was sleeping sort of in some out of the way stairwell, and she just threw a blanket over me and gave me some food, broccoli and mushroom pie. Never got the chance to thank her because she just ran away.
We've been led to believe, the community has been led to believe that there's going to be anything up to 7,000 houses provided, but we've got very little control about how much of that is going to be affordable. And even to use the words affordable have different definitions depending on where you're coming from. The Lord Provost Commission that was looking into the whole sort of sustainable development and the development of Edinburgh as a city growing. They've recently been holding some hearings, inquiries into the issue of affordable housing, and we know that the developers are actually resisting having a large percentage, a requirement put on them to provide a large percentage of affordable housing for rent. That actually causes a lot of problems because the council themselves, the housing departments, have done a housing needs study which identified that there's a desperate need for at least 12,000 houses a year for rent if the city is going to grow, because you can't, you have to have houses for rent available. Not everybody has an income that they can walk into an area and just buy straight off. Lots of people do have to rent. And it's also good from encouraging workers to move in from area to area, especially public sector workers. So The issue of affordability is actually quite crucial. But this community, we've been fighting for a long time to try and get 40% affordable housing on these sites. We're not going to get anywhere near that. We've been told by the Waterfront company that it's an arm's length company that's set up by the council originally, that they will try to go for 20%. They will try. But their share of the housing that's being provided is actually quite low. And it's the other private developers, Lattice and Fourth Ports, that we're actually going to have a real battle with, because they see this land as a unique opportunity to make an awful lot of money out of housing. I mean, absolutely marvellous views. It's in a really good central point because it's only 10-15 minutes away from the city centre. It's also in an area that is fast developing further along the waterfront in the direction of Leith. It'll be an absolutely prime selling point. There is nothing there that would motivate them to provide affordable housing. And we know it's going to be a huge battle. Every time we've tried to address the issue with them, they kind of fudge it and say, oh, well, we'll have to see what we can decide, and we'll have to see how we think the market's going to go, and we'll have to see what kind of housing we're building. We have not yet got a firm figure from them about how much housing, either as a percentage or in numbers, is going to be provided for rent.
Edinburgh's really suffering from a chronic need for affordable social housing. Could you tell us what provisions been made for that in the master plan?
Let's define terms first. Social housing is now a term which is falling slightly out of favour in favour of this term affordable housing. One doesn't normally now talk about affordable social housing in a way that should be the same. But affordable housing is the concept that you are trying to build a community, and affordable housing is any type of housing which is not priced by reference to its market value. So it doesn't just include social housing or the lower the rented sector, but it also includes low-cost home ownership, shared ownership, and other devices which exist to fill that gap between the rented sector and the open market sector. So yes, coming back to your question, Edinburgh has a chronic shortage of affordable housing, and arguably the biggest shortage is in the middle ranges. But there's also policies now in Edinburgh to provide minimum quantities, well, quite high quantities, of affordable housing for rent at the lower end, and we are come fairly and squarely within that policy as well. So, talking in terms of the waterfront, the master plan calls for 20% affordable housing in using the wider definition, and it's now our job to interpret that. The policies published by the City Council make allowances for the fact that where you've got very high costs of infrastructure or decontamination or things like that, there may be relaxations in the target. And Lattice, ourselves, Fourth Ports will, of course, each reach our own agreement with the planning authority as to where we stand with relation to that 20% affordable housing target.
The kind of things that will be introduced to service the needs of the people that will be buying houses down on the waterfront will be exclusive. They won't be inclusive, because it will become a very exclusive address. It will become a sought-after area to live in, and as a consequence of that, prices will go up, house prices will go up. It will become more and more remote over a period of time. And I don't think they've actually thought that through. I think they've thought of it as like a snapshot. You know, this is what we're going to do. This is how nice it's going to be when it's finished. That's not the reality. The reality will be it will become much more of an exclusive area. You know, and you'll have a community at the other side of West Granton Road that will be looking on and thinking, what about us? And unless there is a massive amount of improvement in people's economic and social circumstances, this is going to be a very exclusive area. It's not going to be inclusive. And it doesn't matter what the waterfront people say to themselves. They can use as nice expressions. They can actually have really good intentions, and I think they have. The reality of the economic drive that is governing the decision making will mean that people will be excluded. I mean, we had that situation in London where the Docklands, for instance, was just given an absolute carte blanche. Docklands Development Corporation were given a carte blanche to develop as they wanted to. All planning restrictions went out of the window, you know, and communities were alienated from the whole process. It was an intention, a clear intention of the Conservative government to do that, and I think the same will happen here. I think that the flexibility will mean exclusion. The interesting thing about the issue of giving flexibility to business is not new. We were here before in the 80s, under Michael Heseltine when he was at the Department of Environment. Whole regions of England were given flexible status, they were given development status, whereby all planning restrictions went out the window and all the kind of requirements of consultation and all the rest of it disappeared. And what he found was in the end that communities were just not included in the whole development strategy. And it caused an awful lot of problems that have since had to be addressed about the way that industrial development took place, about the interrelationship between communities and
what are our hopes? What are our personal hopes? Well, our personal hopes are that
those mistakes.
We all feel the same in
the
this team, really, that it's quite a privilege in the first place to get involved with building a new part of a city with a name as great as Edinburgh. I mean, you can go to your grave feeling you've had a part in something that is quite special. Not many people are given that chance. And of course, beyond that, at the very least, we hope we'll be able to revisit it as time goes on, in our dotage perhaps, and say, well, we had a little bit of this, and it's done some good for the city.
I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that all strategic planning is now done by the market. It's done. Capital makes the decisions now. The state plays very little part in deciding what gets built and where. I mean, the debate just now about whether Glasgow or Edinburgh Airport or both should have a high-speed rail link, that'll be decided by business, and they'll decide that Edinburgh will probably get it because the business rationale would say it makes more sense because there's more business located here. People want to come here. And the state just goes along with it. They'll plough in the billions of pounds that are necessary to put that link in place, but the decision will ultimately be taken by the market. And you can see it. I mean, the recent sell-off of the council housing in Glasgow as a result of the state being completely helpless or unwilling to help itself, if you like, and it kind of throws up its hands and says there's nothing we can do, and that the market is the only option that we have, and it's the only way in which things can get done. Which seems like a deeply depressing state of affairs, that we are unable to take some control of our own lives and make decisions about what gets built, where it gets built, and where investment is channeled.
It's declaring political bankruptcy, more or less.
You can see where they're trying to gouge out the rail lines and everything. There's graffiti, you can graffiti on the walls, but you can't.
Our concierge are good. They try and keep it as clean as possible by painting over it. As you can see there, it's been all painted for us. They try their best, but they're losing a fighting battle.
You can see where the paint's flowing off the walls. of the stairs. There you go.
As you can see, they can spell.
Yeah, a lot of them can. We've actually got small landings here as well.
There's only 2 flats on that.
Because the other one goes into a fire exit for the other flat on the other landing. Well, there you go, there's, you can see there. Don't know when the last time that was painted. It's really bad here as well. The place is just falling to bits. Again, you can see different colours because they can't get the same colour paint anymore, so they paint up everything they can get. And railings and everything are a mess. Usually find them all bent and trying to straighten them. It doesn't always work.
Years ago, what used to happen was you used to do 5 years in a high-rise flat, and then you were given the option of moving to a house with a garden or a low-rise flat. You don't get that choice now. There is no choice. As I say, I've told you.
Why is that?
Because there is no houses, and there's nowhere else to put us.
The council hasn't built houses since the 1970s.
Late 70s was the last time the council built any houses whatsoever in Edinburgh.
I mean, all the money's getting spent in the
centre
centre.
town.
And the money they spend in there should be getting spent out here to build the houses for people. But because the private housing sector landlords, they're building the houses, let's send them to them, let them go on. Because a private housing sector have to give the council so many of their houses to put tenants into. But people, as I say, people can't afford that. You've got to have your first month's rent plus a deposit, and that can be up to £800 right away. I mean, I know somebody that went over there and they had been saving up hard to take for a holiday. It was a choice of the holiday or get one of these to come out here. They paid their money for that. And they'd been saving up for a long time for that. But just to get out of the flats because they couldn't hack it.
There is a lot of people who can't handle living in a flat. Not these. A lot of them.
I started sleeping here about late 1993. I mean, I knew about this golf course, more or less since I started studying, just because it happens to be next to the university where I studied, ever since I left school. But I made a conscious effort to start going here probably just after I got kicked out of sleeping in a stairwell in Grassmarket. The main reason I chose here was because there was no other people here. If you sleep sort of rough in the middle of town, then you're bound to actually meet people. You're bound to meet people who, you want that, you're threatening. You meet like sort of people who just want to move you out because like you're sleeping under a stairwell in a tenement or whatever, and you just want to, and they just want you to go. You get hassle from the police. You get it's just a whole load of hassle from most people. Here, no people. I could see how somebody would think that if you were sort of very poor and you were living in sort of a fairly nice area, you'd feel sort of, bitter and twisted about it. And I didn't really, I didn't get much of that. I mean, I did actually steal the odd pint off, like, these pint of milk off these guys, people's doorsteps and what have you. But as far as I was aware, I was living, kind of off them. I mean, I was sort of, I was using the library to steal an education. I was using the facilities in this university behind me. I was using the sort of, I was stealing the pints of milk off these people's doorsteps and what have you. So, I mean, really, it was kind of more or less keeping me alive more than anything else in a sort of parasitic way. I didn't choose. I mean, it was just like, that was pretty much the way I had to live. And most people are parasites in one way or another, and economically non-productive. I mean, it's, people just have to, live the way they can. I was actually on the council house waiting list for like well over a year and a half at least. Basically I think I ticked every area of Edinburgh as being somewhere I'd want to live, and it still took years for me to actually get anywhere. I mean, the thing about the council is that if you're single, you're technically not homeless. You're only technically homeless if you're a family, and therefore single people are not classed as homeless by the council and therefore not eligible to be put up the housing queue.
As you were saying about you'd wanted to move flat here and you'd had some problems with that, could you tell me a little bit?
I came in 10 years ago because of my marriage breakup, so I came in here. I was told I could get a house next door to Yvonne. I put my medicals in. I was told I'd get a house within 6 months. 10 years down the line, I'm still waiting. Every time I see a house that's on the ground floor, I tell them about it, and the week after it, somebody else is in it. It's so hard to get out of these ones you're in, unless you're going out into the private sector. To get a house out of the council, no. I moved from 11 down to 2 because of my health, but I'm lucky because I have a lift on my land, so I'm quite lucky that way.
And I've moved from the 11th down to first floor. But then again, you lose all your points, so you have to build all that up again.
The minute you move house, even though it's in the same block, you lose all your points
that you've built up
over 10 years.
Did you get a point a year? Is it a point a year?
1 point a year. I know that sounds peculiar, but that's all you get is 1 point a year. Is that thing again?
Yeah.
I thought it was to be taken out. See that plan? The beach. I thought they were going to take that nail out.
I had to chase them out and I broke my hammer.
They broke your hammer?
I got it back in the office to get a refund. It's all bent and the handle fell off.
Because they're the fire doors.
And my screwdriver as well, and they fell off.
Did they? They must have been not good ones.
I don't know where it came.
Oh well.
What you need from that is a decent pair of stills and draw it up. Confidence to get onto it.
Well, that's a job for you, Glenn.
Give me jobs.
That's the problem, I say, we'll just get this hammer, it's holding this amount of money, because if you spend a wee bit extra, that'll okay.
That's true, because it means you've got to keep buying new ones.
I thought it had been prudent to have a basic toolkit in every concierge office.
Well, I just started building it up, eh?
There's quite cheap out there. It's Leslie, it just gives me a buzz. Can I borrow it?
Can I have a light, please? See, if you spent that wee bit more, you wouldn't have to go out and buy a second one.
Learn by your mistakes, though, eh?
need to just bring it on to screwdriver.
Well, the screwdriver actually, one of the residents asked for it, yeah, it's broke.
Okay.